Hey everybody, it's Billy again, and this will be my first little video installment on my brand new YouTube channel, the Wiccanarium. And for the first video, I kind of wanted to introduce you to me and basically tell my story of how I came into Wicca and what I've basically been doing in the decades following. I'm kind of showing my age. So let me turn you around. This is something I do on my other YouTube channel, kind of like a daily walk and talk type deal. My other channel is called Gecko's Trails. It's a hiking centered YouTube channel. So I just kind of turn the camera around and I walk about 3 miles from my house to the interstate and back, basically, and I talk. So let me turn you around. All right. Like I said, my name is Billy Mitchell, and I was raised Lutheran. So I come from a Christian background. Being here in Texas, Wicca wasn't something you just went around and told people about. We're kind of like the southern end of the Bible Belt, so you can imagine how difficult it might be for a Wiccan or pagan. And my parents, being who they are, aren't accepting of the choice that I made. My mother especially is very religious and takes the Bible quite literally. But I'm not really going to get into that too much. I first heard about Wicca from an unlikely source. I'd kind of been interested in the New Age kind of stuff from the time that I either saw the movie or I read the book. It was Shirley MacLaine's Out on a Limb. But that opened me up to New Age concepts, you know, astral travel, the paranormal, the parapsychological, and things of that nature. But it wasn't until I read a book by Whitley Strieber called Cat Magic that I was introduced to Wicca. Now, the foreword of the book kind of explains about Wicca and what it is, and he gives the address for Circle Sanctuary in Mount Horeb, Wisconsin. So after reading the book, and I won't go into the book other than to say it's about a girl going back to her hometown in the mountains from the big city. She's a writer she's an artist, sorry. And she's been contracted to do the artwork for an edition of a book for this older woman who turns out to be the matron of a coven, a Wiccan coven. And they live, I think it's like an old plantation. It's been kind of converted to an intentional community, or a pagan community. And there's all kinds of adventures and mishaps, and it's a really good story, and I would highly recommend reading it. But in the foreword of the book, the address was given for Circle Sanctuary, so I wrote it. And that was where I got my first information about Wicca. They sent me like a letter, and they sent me a free copy of the Circle Network News, which was kind of like a newspaper. You got to remember, I first came across and read the book in like 1989. I was a senior in high school. So it was kind of pre-internet. So, I mean, the biggest thing in computers at that time was dial-up bulletin boards. There was no internet access. It wasn't around yet. Not for a few years. Unless you were in like a university or something like that, or the military or government. Anyway, I got the newspaper and I read it, and I liked what I was hearing. I mean, growing up, we lived on 127 acres of land outside of Silsbee, Texas, which is north of Beaumont, Texas, southeast Texas. So we lived in the piney woods. So I was immersed in nature and I loved it. I absolutely thrived. And I knew that Christianity and I consider myself to be a very spiritual person, but there were things about Christianity that didn't really sit right with me. And I won't really go into details right now about it. But the big thing that drew me in is basically you were your own priest or priestess. And, well, not even that at the time. It wasn't until a little bit later that I was introduced to that. But the whole mystery religion concept and just what Wicca stood for and was about, I fell in love with it. And it wasn't until I bought and read the book Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner by Scott Cunningham that it became clear to me that, you know, you didn't really need a coven. You didn't need a group of people to learn about Wicca. So at that time, I was out of the military. I had joined the Army right out of high school, and I got married, had a couple of kids, and I had kind of forgotten about Wicca. Well, I hadn't forgotten about it. I was still, I had a couple of pen pals while I was in the Army, like in basic training, and then when I got to my permanent duty station up in New York, I would write people and they would write back. I mean, you gotta remember, this is before emails. So, you know, snail mail was still the way to communicate with people. So slowly but surely I learned. And then once I got out of the Army, I started going to community college, and that's when I found, you know, Scott Cunningham's book. I read it and I'm like, whoa, I can do this myself. So on a spring day in 1994, I had my self-dedication ritual And I dedicated myself to Wicca, to learning, to practicing, and being Wiccan. I mean, you know, there's no real way other than that to describe it. I mean, it's not something that's easily definable as a feeling. I know when I did the ritual, it was in a clearing right outside the college campus, and I had found things in nature, and I put my trench coat that I was wearing on the ground as an altar, and I held a circle, and that was my dedication ritual. And the feeling I had when it was over with was contentment and peace, and that it felt like I was a part of the world, you know, on a elemental level. And it was just the best feeling in the world. And I wanted to share that with my wife, and that did not go well. My wife was Roman Catholic. Sorry. And yeah, not because of this, but eventually we went our separate ways. And I moved in with a friend of mine from college, and we were roommates for a good 10 years. But there was another one of our friends that, you know, I met them both on the same day. My roommate and this other friend. Come to find out, this other friend was Wiccan. And so we eventually, me and my roommate, ended up moving in with him and his girlfriend. And we all rented a house together. And my roommate wasn't Wiccan, but he wasn't, you know, he didn't mind it, you know. So, I mean, we got along great. We had a good time. Me and my friend and his girlfriend, we started our own little coven in, you know, in upstate New York. And we would go up to the city park at night, which was up on this huge hill, and it kind of like overlooked the entire city. And there were little fields out there interspersed in it, and they were all mowed and manicured, but some of them were very secluded. And we would go there to have our rituals. We would, you know, carry all our stuff up in backpacks and have our rituals, because nobody went up there at night, really. So it was nice and private, and we never had to deal with any people. But, you know, eventually life happens, and you know, move away and lose contact or whatnot. And I ended up back here in Texas. And that's when I found out how against this that my mother was, because I told her about it. And I swear she very nearly literally had a heart attack. At least that's how it felt. And she made me swear that I would go back to church and I would find God, and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I'm not downplaying Christianity. I mean, as a path, it's valid for some people, you know. And I'm a proponent of, you know, the true freedom of religion. You're free to worship how you like, and it could be paganism, it could be Wicca, it could be Christianity, Muslim, Buddhism, Hinduism, it doesn't matter. I heard, I think it was Christopher Pinsack wrote in his book, the Inner Temple of Witchcraft, that deity is like a diamond in the sky, and we all see source through a different facet of that diamond. It's all the same source. It's just, you know, people have different names for source and different traditions and different dogmas. And it's all the same source. So I'm a very strong proponent for religious tolerance. So, you know, I gave in for her sanity and, you know, promised that I'd go back to church and everything. And, but I kept reading about Wicca and practicing privately. I went back in the broom closet and built up a fairly decent library. You know, Silver Ravenwolf, Raymond Buckland, Scott Cunningham, Christopher Pinsack, you know, DJ Conway, Eden McCloy. I mean, just the whole gambit of Wiccan and pagan authors. And eventually I met my current wife, who ironically enough met on witchbox.com, which, for those of you who are old enough to remember, Witchbox, it was an institution. I mean, there were pagan articles, it was a pagan networking system. They listed, you could list your shops there. It was like the Facebook of Wiccan paganism back in the day. And so I had just gotten out of I hadn't gotten out of the not a bad relationship, but it was stagnant and not going anywhere. And we'd been together for 7 years, you know, and I wanted more, and she wasn't willing to give more. And she had her reasons, and I understand that, and I don't hold that against her. I mean, they were valid reasons. And, but I kind of got in my mind what I would want in a future partner. And I started looking on Witchbox, and I came across a couple of people, and so I started writing them. And one of them really got kind of serious, and eventually we decided to meet. She was meeting a couple of friends at a coffee house and invited me to come and join them, and we met. And like 3 days later, we went on our first date, and like a month later, I was moved in. I mean, it was that quick, you know? And that was back in 2005, and we've been together ever since. I had finally found somebody that I could share Wicca with on an intimate, personal level, who was also Wiccan. So I wasn't alone anymore in my spirituality, even though I firmly believe that everybody is on their own separate spiritual journey. But it doesn't mean we have to be alone. So we did start going to church. It was just a Unitarian Universalist church that had an Earth-centered spirituality group. Actually, I think that first one was a CUPS group. That's the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, which isn't around anymore either, sad to say. They've kind of gone in favor of just having Earth-centered spirituality groups, which was at the second Unitarian Universalist church we went to after we moved up in the Dallas area. And now we're going to a Unity Church. It used to be called the Unity Church of Practical Christianity, but they've since dropped the Christianity part and it's become the Unity Church of New Thought. And it is very, I mean, it does have Christian values, but it's non-denominational and I don't know what the term would be. You can be any religion and go to Unity. Like the Unity Church we go to, they embrace a lot of the Hindu values and the mantras and the singing in Sanskrit, and it's more of a philosophy than a religion. But it speaks to multiple religions. You can be Christian and go there. You can be Hindu and go there. You can be pagan and go there. You can be agnostic and go there. It doesn't really matter. It's a good home for us. Spiritually for now. But along the way, I was introduced to other topics and things like Spirit Science, which is a website that has this like cartoon character called Patchman, and he talks a lot about sacred geometry and a lot of physics and how it can explain spirituality and consciousness and creation itself. So that's what got me interested in sacred geometry. And about the same time, I came across some videos on YouTube about permaculture, which is another great philosophy. And about that same time also, I came across a website about Earthships and Biotecture, which is a building method where the home is basically like a living entity and it takes care of the people that live there. Well, I kind of put all that together and I'm like, you know what? You know, with a foundation in spirituality and a knowledge of sacred geometry and an understanding of how the elements work, you can create a living environment that is symbiotic with nature. And I'm like, okay, there are 4 tenets right there: spirituality, sacred geometry, the elements, and sustainable life practices. And by sustainable life practices, I mean permaculture, biotecture, alternative energy, and intentional community. And I thought about it, and I'm like, you know what? I just came full circle from that first book about Wicca. That was fiction, by Whitley Strieber, being that pagan community and that pagan intentional community. It kind of floored me, and I'm like, I've got to make this a thing. So that's why I created the philosophy of Divinum Sustenere, or divine sustainability. But that's a whole nother topic. Right now I'm just kind of riffing on my history here, you know, about how I came in to Wicca and where it led me in my life. And honestly, it's led me to the creation of this YouTube channel. I mean, I've got my other YouTube channel, Gecko's Trails, about hiking, and that's just something that I like to do. You know, this is, you know, a part of who and what I am. You know, I should be sharing that. So I decided to create this YouTube channel, the Wiccanarium. And don't let the name fool you. It's not just going to be Wicca. I'm going to include, you know, paganism and shamanism and druidism, and, you know, more than just Wicca. But I like the name. I mean, I had thought about calling it Spirit Raven's Occultarium. You know, because if you look at the word occultarium, you kind of take apart that word, and it's kind of synonymous on a vocabulary level with aquarium or solarium, or, you know, it's a place for the study of that. So the occultarium. And as far as I know, it's not a word, you know, but etymologically, I believe that's the right word. Etymology. The etymological use of occultarium is valid. But I'm like, no, people aren't going to get that. So I settled on the Wiccanarium. Because there's a lot more to the occult than what I want to talk about on this channel. And you'll have to forgive me, sometimes I ramble, sometimes I go off on tangents, and sometimes I never get back to what I had originally wanted to say. I apologize in advance if that happens on here. But that was basically my journey in Wicca. And I'm still on my journey. I'm having to relearn a lot of things that I learned in the beginning, because there for a while I wasn't active in my practice. I kind of didn't do anything for a lot of years, and I grew in other areas. I was going to college for geography and sociology, and by watching Spirit Science, it kind of opened me up into aspects of Christianity that I hadn't really thought about. So I kind of researched the history of organized religion. And man, did that blow my mind. I mean, the first organized religion was ancient Sumerian, which is the Sumerian pantheon of gods and goddesses, Enlil, Enki, Marduk, those guys. Well, that happened about the same time that King Hammurabi wrote his codes for a civilized society. Because, as you may not know, Sumeria was the first kind of nation to have an organized city with like running water and streets and multi-leveled houses. So it was kind of coincidental in appearance that the organized religion would pop up the same time that he wrote his laws. But on closer inspection, it's not really that coincidental. The setting up of the organized religion kind of bolstered the laws written with spiritual consequences. You know, not just physical present day consequences, but hold on. Forever in the afterlife consequences. So it was a way for the governing leadership to control the populace through fear of, okay, you know, if you're going to do this, sure, you're going to be stoned, but you're going to go to hell, you know, everlasting torture, you know. I mean, who's not going to say, oh, well, we'll follow the laws, So that was also about the same time that mankind kind of split up into two groups. You had the people that stayed in Samaria and Egypt and that area, and you had the others that migrated north. And I'm sure some of them went ahead and stayed there, or migrated west and inhabited, you know, the British Isles and Ireland and all of those, and became the Celts. And I'm sure all those people became the Norse, the Picts, the Angles, the Celts, all of that group. But there was still more of that group that migrated west through, you know, the Caucasus Mountains and Siberia and across the land bridge into North America and on down to South America. Well, those people were the Native Americans, and they were kind of unique in a way because they kept going. These other people settled down. They started their own quote-unquote organized religions, kind of following in the historical footsteps of the ancient Sumerians, because you had the ancient Sumerians and the Egyptians and the Hindu people all come across their religions about the same time. Now, they probably had different origins, but the end was the same. It controlled the populace through fear. So Marduk was actually the god figure that inspired Zeus, the creation of Zeus in the Greek mythology. And of course the Romans, very closely linked to the Greek, and they kind of mirrored the gods and goddess archetypes. They had different names, but they were basically the same archetype. And this group of people just kept going. They're like, no, that's not our spirituality. And I mean, they did have their archetypes, but they didn't worship them. They learned from them. They were stories, they were lessons, kind of like fables. And there was, you know, Grandfather Sky, Grandmother Earth, and Mother Nature. And that was the whole of their religious aspect of their spirituality. They didn't really have dogma to guide them in certain like rituals or something. They were very nature bound. They were the true stewards of nature, the way humanity was meant to be. And I'm getting up on a pedestal here. Y'all have to forgive me. It's something I'm kind of passionate about. We were never, as the human race, never meant to be masters of the planet. We are meant to be caretakers, stewards. We're a part of the creation, not above it. And that's kind of where my philosophy is getting back to. Because the knowledge of sacred geometry, even though it's kind of been lost in the stacks, you know, to use a librarian term, it's a concept that's been around for more than 52,000 years. They have found carvings of the flower of life, which is the geometric progression of creation, which has each additional circle in the progression has scientific meaning. And basically, it's they call it the I forget the name they call it, but it had to do with Genesis. Because if you look at it, there are 7 steps to the progression, the 7 days of creation. And each step of the progression dealt with that whole same concept that was the biblical days of creation, but it explained it scientifically. There were scientific equations embedded in the progression itself, and it explains scientifically creation and consciousness. So the whole entirety of the multiverse explained in one single geometric progression, the flower of life. And it was known all over the world. And it was always known by the same name. And you got to remember, this is 52,000 years ago. So do your own research, you know, you'll see. Or you can buy the books that Patchman was using. He goes by Jordan River now, the guy that started Spirit Science. He has his own the Spirit Network or something like that. It's a thing now, and they just started charging for it. It's not free anymore, which is why I'm not on it anymore. But the books that he used as reference was Drumvelo Melchizedek's The Ancient Secrets of the Flower of Life, volumes 1 and 2. And honestly, Melchizedek has very interesting notions about the origins of mankind. A lot of it has to do with alien influence. and that the ancient Sumerian gods were aliens. But, you know, there's no way for us to know that factually, historically, unless we can, like, archaeologically find skeletons of these alien creatures. But once he gets into the spirit science part of it, it's bang on. And honestly, the third tenet, the elements, is part of sacred geometry, but because it's knowledge of how the elements interact with each other and how they behave, that it has to become its own tenet. And, you know, and because a lot of your spiritual paths, namely paganism and Hinduism and Native American and Wiccan, strongly view the elements. So I figured it had to be its own tenet. Because you can have knowledge of sacred geometry, but unless you understand the elements, you can't really work with the sustainable life practices, the permaculture and the biotecture, because it is element based. So that is why I created the philosophy, because by knowing these things and following these things and understanding these things, we can live symbiotically with our planet, with Mother Nature, with Gaia. And I think a lot of groups have this same basic philosophy. It's just they call it something else, or it's not structured the way I have my philosophy structured, but it has the same end result, that we are stewards and we can live symbiotically. And eventually I'll get around to writing the book, the philosophy book for Divinum Sustinere. I'm just not there yet. I can, there's a dead deer up here and it smells. Which I have to be careful because there's also coyotes around here. I'm hoping they won't go this close to the interstate. But I do hear them occasionally back off that way or back off that way. There's a lot of like cotton fields and everything around here. So that's basically my biography. And when I did my self-dedication ritual, I picked a Wiccan name, and I'll go ahead and share that with you guys, because that's one of the names that I'm known by, and that is Raven Golden Seal. And I am Reverend Raven Golden Seal. So, hello, how are you? This is me. And I wanted this to be the first video beyond the welcome video on this channel, because that helps you to understand where this information is coming from and through what lens it's being filtered. Because everybody experiences their own reality. So my reality is not going to be the same as your reality. Because we're separate from each other. We're not one organism. We're more than one organism viewing the world in slightly different ways. So your reality is going to be different from my reality. But this video and this channel is for our shared reality, if that makes any sense. It does to me, but that's only because, you know, I've studied what I've studied. And that's where you kind of get into the whole multiple dimensions and multiple dimensions coexisting together. I mean, if that's not an analogy for the human race, I don't know what is. You know, everybody has their own individual reality, but we coexist in the same shared reality. So, anyway. And if you want, you know, leave comments as y'all find this channel. I don't know where exactly I'm going to advertise it. Definitely on paganspace.com. And other pagan networking sites as I can come across them and post on them. And of course, I'll definitely have the tag words in each video, so it'll come up in the YouTube searches at least. And I'll try to make this, the information that I provide, not regional specific. So if somebody from the UK wanted to come and watch, the information in it is going to be as viable to people here as people where they're from, or in, you know, other countries around the world, as it relates to Wicca and paganism. And granted, my focus and my own eclectic version of Wicca is mainly Celtic. My patron and patroness are Breed and Cernunnos. Those are, you know, my patron and patroness. I mean, I work with the other deities as I need them, or as I'm called to by them. But, you know, Cernunnos, because of my love of the wild places and nature, and Breed because of my creative nature as a poet and writer and photographer, and through the creation of my photo art. So and I'm also drawn to shamanism and druidism. Oh yeah, there's the dead deer. Poor lady. And the thing about it is I went on one of my nightly walk and talks, and I'm fairly certain I saw that same deer crossing the road. I was right here and they crossed just beyond the light. There were two of them. And then the next day, I see her dead on the side of the road. So, and she wasn't there that night I walked by. So, anyway. And there's the moon. And, you know, I will have to admit, by learning sacred geometry, a lot of the mystery that first drew me to Wicca has kind of been diminished. And I'm sad about that, because I learned what some of those mysteries were. You know, doesn't mean it's any less valid or anything, but that sense of adventure and that sense of learning something that was hidden is what kind of first drew me to Wicca. And that's not really something I can get back. I can find it in other ways, in other like subtopics within Wicca and paganism, but I don't think it'll ever be to the same degree as it was in the beginning. Which right now I'm currently enrolled in the Magical Circle School of Witchcraft, which is online. You can Google it. It is the best learning institution for Wicca and paganism and witchcraft anywhere on the net. My personal opinion, granted, but I stand by it, and it's 100% free. The instructors and everything, they're not paid. They volunteer their time to do these courses, and it's something that they really truly believe in. It's very well organized, and it's like going to an actual university online. They take that much care for the effort that the students take and what they're learning. It's not necessarily a repeat back what you just learned type instruction. It's, you can take what you learn and personalize it. It's for your learning. Like right now, I'm still in the orientation course. But once I'm done with that, I can take, they have hundreds of different classes you can take, from the different gods and goddesses to the different holidays to spells, ritual tools, crafting, just all kinds of different classes, different disciplines, like divination is broken down into tarot reading and palm reading and numerology and just all the different types of divination. There's a class for it, and sometimes multiple classes for it. And they use the learning platform called Moodle, Moodle, which is an awesome tool for getting these classes and everything online. And you can even access it through the app on your phone. And you don't have as great of you won't have all of the tools available to you that you have on the internet website, but you'll be able to do most things through the app. The leadership is very well organized. They have a council that kind of governs the school. They have all kinds of rules that you have to follow, different things you have to do to be there, and but it's not outrageous. It's very doable for anybody on any schedule. They kind of require you to do at least one assignment a month, or at least prove that you're working on it. You have to do a monthly check-in for whatever class you're in, and you have to say, hey, I just started this, or I just turned in this, or I'm working on this still, and you kind of upload kind of like what you've done as an attachment, so the teacher can see, yeah, he is progressing, she's progressing. But if you don't check in, like, they'll sweep you from the class, to make room for other people. Because if you're not doing the work, you're not serious about being there, and somebody else is that serious about being there. So, it is kind of strict in that sense, but for a good cause and for a good purpose. So I would highly recommend that. And they do offer, or are going to offer, 2 different traditions, and as like you can be initiated into those traditions. Hold on. Sorry, my addiction is getting in the way of me making a video. One is a more ceremonial type magic, like Gardnerian or Alexandrian Wicca, and the other is more hedge witchery type Wicca. And there may be other traditions down the road, but these traditions are specific to this school, which eventually I may actually go into one of them. I don't know. Well, right now I'm just learning again, because I've forgotten a lot of the stuff that I used to know. Like, you know, I just turned 51, so you know the old saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's true. Oh, 18-wheeler just had a blowout. Luckily, he's fine and didn't run into anybody. Whew. Adrenaline's pumping now. I'm sure you heard that. Anyway, and another thing I'm doing kind of concurrent to the university, the school, is I've kind of started Christopher Pinsack's Inner Temple of Witchcraft. And I have the whole book series. It's the Inner Temple, the Outer Temple, the Shamanic Temple, and I think the Mystic Temple. I want to say that there's 5 books in the series, but I can only name 4. Anyway, and he did a couple of other books. He did a book on Reiki. He did another book called Sons of the Goddess, which is for men. And he's done a few other books. And he has been a great role model, being a homosexual male that is out. And he's been real influential and very, maybe not influential, but a very good force for LGBTQ Wiccan pagan people, which I consider myself to be a part of. My wife and I are polyamorous. And she's into other subcultures as well. I won't get into that, but I tend to be more asexual, but I have definite attractions to both male and female, and I am currently exploring that. And I have a specific love for drag queens, and I love drag shows. So that is basically a biography of me and why I'm starting this channel, because I talk about this stuff on my hiking channel, and I know not everybody there is going to be pagan or Wiccan, and I don't want to, first off, I don't want to offend anybody. And it's the same here. I don't want to offend anybody here. But as far as my philosophy and my spirituality goes, I would feel more comfortable sharing in a group, a channel like this, than I would on my, sorry for the finger in the screen. I would feel better about sharing it here than I would there. So, and here I'm hoping that the people that subscribe and follow will be more vocal in their comments, because I rarely ever get any comments on my hiking channel, other than the occasional troll, which I then have to report and have them banned. So same here, no negativity. If you're gonna leave a comment, be positive or neutral, you know, be questioning. Don't be accusing or negative. No cyberbullying. If what I say doesn't agree with you, you don't have to come back. But you don't have to berate anybody here either. You know, live and let live. What I talk about may not be for you, and just leave it at that. But there are other people who will fully enjoy and get this channel. And that's all I really hope for. That being said, I think this is a perfect opportunity to promote my Zazzle store. I do have a Wiccan pagan oriented Zazzle store called the Sacred Forest Gifts, or it's just called Sacred Forest Gifts, and I'll leave a link in the description to it. And I make Wiccan themed and pagan themed items like t-shirts and coffee mugs and canvas wrap prints and buttons and rubber ink stamps and stationery that people can purchase and I get royalties for. Like I just created this past week some rubber stamps that say like Blessed Be and Merry Meet and Happy Yule, and one has a pentagram on it. And then I made a couple of notebooks. One was a 3-ring binder that was black that just said Book of Shadows on the front and on the spine. And I made another spiral notebook that has a picture on it. It's a black and white picture, but it has a blue bonnet on it that is in full color. And I have Dream Journal written across the top of it. And I have another spiral notebook that has a picture of an altar that I did a ritual with that has a whole bunch of crystals on it. It was a crystal ritual. And on the top of that, it has spell work. So you can kind of like keep a journal of your spells. What works, what doesn't, you know. And you can buy multiple copies and record all your spells there, or all the spells that you like there. You know, and that way you don't have to go digging through your Book of Shadows to find your spells. You know, unless you just want to, as part of the ritual, to have the Book of Shadows there. But you don't necessarily need the entire Book of Shadows to do a spell. So, this way, you know, one little spiral, you know, have a big binder, a big book. So, and you can also, you know, write in the outcomes for specific spells. That's kind of like a journal. You know, why you did it and what happened. So, those are a little sample of the things that you can find in Sacred Forest Gifts. And I want to say it's Zazzle.com/Sacred Forest Gifts. But don't, I'll put the link in there. Oh, my battery's running low. Which means I should probably wrap this up. So let me turn you back around. So I'm coming up to a light here. All right, so here I am again. Hi. So if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you like this video and you like the channel, go ahead and hit that like button. And go ahead and ring that notification bell to be notified of any upcoming videos that I put out on the Wiccanarium. So we'll see you later, and until next time, blessed be, merry part.